this will be my last Dharma talk for a few weeks. And what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk about disowned selves. Yeah, that's what I was moved to talk about. Disowned selves. It's a thing. Yeah, it's a real thing. So I hope this is helpful, for everybody, those of you online too. Welcome, Aparna. Good to see you. And Martha, welcome. So, in Zen we say a lot, we talk about no self. Master Hawkwood said, true self is no self. But what is this no self? It's not the absence of selving. You could say there's a lot of selving that we have going on, which is an organic part of actually being human and functioning in the world. So no self means no fixed self. We actually have many selves, many perspectives actually coexisting within our minds. You could say from a spatial standpoint, there's almost an infinite number of different perspectives available right in this room. If I move just to the side, it's a different perspective on things. If I rotate my head, my perspective is very different from the perspective Keith has coming this way. There's this way in which, I feel this to be the case that I'm almost schizophrenic, that I can have very internally consistent and coherent belief systems, feeling senses, ideas that are all constellated in some kind of organic, working form or pattern. And then I could have another one that's almost contradictory to that one, maybe overlaps a little bit. While I'm in one, I'm not really accepting, some of those other ones that are not constellated within that particular self-sense. And then I can be in that other one, and I've kind of lost track, perhaps, of some of the other qualities. I heard about this result that I think it's pretty verifiable, but I don't have the reference, and it sounds really woo-woo. But I think there was a study done of this person who had multiple personality disorder and actually exhibited diabetic symptoms in one personality and not in the other. Does anybody, and I'm looking in your direction, both of you, do you have some knowledge?
I know there's been studies like that.
Yeah.
I don't know how sound they are.
Okay.
Like with glasses, prescriptions are
Yeah.
different,
Mm-hmm.
and like brainwave patterns are really distinctive.
Yeah.
But I just don't know how, there have been reports, but I don't know if it's really, that's
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Just imagine if that's true. Just imagine that. The whole biological imprint, recessed genes versus expressed genes, to be dependent upon a kind of mental, physical, constellated whole, right? So regardless of that specifically, there is something to this fluidity of these constellated forms that we have. And these self-senses, if you will, selves, they're very context dependent. They're very dependent on the relational environment that we find ourselves in. Our experience of time and space are actually all context dependent, always. This is what the work in relativity and in quantum physics, is actually very much defining, very much on a firm scientific basis, the relativity, obviously, of time and space. That was Einstein's word for it. But I think relativity kind of, I don't know, it doesn't quite get at the strangeness of the phenomenon to say, well, it's relative to something else. You know, it's like it's context dependent. So my whole worldview is completely dependent upon just my position with respect to other beings, other forms. Right? Like even my sense of time is actually unique to this consciousness right here. It's different from yours and yours and yours and yours. It's a very different context. It depends. It can be measurably different, like when I'm moving at a different rate than you are, or when I'm being exposed to a gravitational field that you're not being exposed to. Those are two things that we can actually measure. But it also has to do with the interior experience of our future, future and past, which is different for me than it is for you right now. So that is truly the sense of time. So this thing that's ticking away on the clock on the wall is it's just a machine doing what it does. It's just a small slice of reality, just one small dimension of reality. But the internal context dependency of our own experience is a much deeper and richer sense, dimension, of our own reality. So we need to take care of this. So when we do fixate on just one of these self-senses at the expense of the others, we basically become dysfunctional. You could kind of say, well, why not? I'll just be this constellation and not this other stuff. Well, actually, one of the definitions of dukkha is stuckness, or dysfunctional stuckness, and it actually, I've learned, relates to this image of an axle and a wheel, and a stuck axle or a stuck wheel, right, on a cart. And I guess carts in those days were just two-wheeled carts, and the ox pulled, or a person would pull the cart. So if the axle isn't moving, or one of those wheels is stuck, or both of those wheels are stuck, you basically have a dysfunctional cart, right? It's going to go in circles with the one stuck wheel, or it's not going to go anywhere. That's what the Buddha meant by dukkha, this fundamental dysfunction because the parts aren't working together. We have disowned selves, disembodied, not owned, not felt. That's the result. Suffering from stuckness and dysfunction. And we do this, we deny, or we bypass, or we disown, or we push away, these other selves. So there's a koan about this. I talk about it on occasion. I want to bring it in now. The Zen teacher Goso asked, Senjo and her soul are separated. Which is the true Senjo? This refers to an old kind of ghost story from China, and I want to just read the story as it's presented. Once in a village by a river, a girl and a boy, second cousins, grew up together as inseparable companions. They were so close that the girl's father once joked that they seemed married already. Eventually, they did fall in love. However, the girl's father announced that she was to marry a different man. The girl, whose name was Senjo, and her sweetheart, Ochu, were devastated. And Ochu was so upset that he decided to take his boat and leave the village. But as he began to sail down the river, he saw a shadowy figure standing on the riverbank, and it was Senjo, who stepped into the boat, and they escaped down the river together. 5 years passed. They had 2 children and were very happy. except that from time to time Senjo would burst into tears because she missed her family. They decided to return, and when they arrived home, Ochu went up to Senjo's house to ask forgiveness for leaving with her. Her father seemed surprised and said, "What? From the day you left, Senjo has been upstairs lying on her bed, looking so sad, and she's never said a word. 5 years." Just then, Senjo from the boat arrived at the door, and suddenly Senjo from upstairs appeared, smiling. The two Senjos looked at one another, smiled, and walked right into one another. Instantly, they became one. Yeah. And then the koan is, and the question is, Senjo and her soul are separated, which is the true one? You can see Kate. Yeah, which is the true one? So Senjo might answered, "I'm not sure." Which is the true one? The one who married Ochu? Or the one who stayed with my family and lay sick in bed? Our question might be, which is the true me? The one who is trying to be intimate in a relationship? Or the one who shrinks from contact and intimacy? The one who wants to make a lot of money, or the one who doesn't want to make a lot of money and feels it's not wrong, not right to make a lot of money? The one who enjoys pleasure and the one who resists pleasure? The one who embraces grief and sadness and the one who resists grief and sadness? Which is the true one? So we all have many disowned aspects of ourselves. How can we identify what they are? Well, one clue would be if we find ourselves saying, "Well, I'm never that." We say we're never that. It's a good sign that we've actually disowned that part of ourselves that is that. Some aspects that we commonly disown: anger, sadness, meanness, greed, biased, the biased one. Even some positive qualities. The pleasure-feeling one, the happy one, the risk-taking one, the creative one, the adventurous one, the vulnerable one. How about qualities of competitiveness, jealousy, envy? Oh, those are bad. I really try not to be those. I don't feel jealousy very much. I remember early in my life, in my 20s, and I was in the first significant relationship of my life. And I told her that I wouldn't be jealous, if she had a fling with another guy. She did. And I saw how jealous I really was. Has anybody else made that mistake? Thank you. Thank you, Tai-san. Wow. Wow. Pride, right? So prideful, I thought. I was beyond jealousy. Shishin Roshi was doing parts work. I've worked with Disowned Selves actually quite deeply with my teachers as they were developing their Great Heart work. Some of you know their book, The Great Heart Way. We've done a lot of that work with them, and they developed that work with some informing practices from actually Hal and Sidra Stone's voice dialogue work. Some of you might know, which is a kind of form of parts work, you could say, which itself was integrated into Genpo Roshi's big mind process. Some of you might be familiar with that. I've done some work in those areas. And I can maybe share some of my work, but I'm remembering when Shishin Roshi was doing that work at the beginning. In fact, he was doing it in the context of a workshop that Genpo Roshi was giving. And the facilitator had invited people to enter into their own competitive self, right, to really get in touch with that. And it actually was a bunch of Zen teachers that were in this group. And in the voice dialogue work, you actually shift your position, and so you try to embody, the energetic of the voice, which is really key. I'll say a little bit more about that. And so everybody did that, and then you give voice to that competitive, to that new, sub-personality or voice that you're investigating. And this is secondhand from Shishin Roshi, but he felt, people were going around and they were saying, "Oh yeah, I really want to win. Yeah, I really want to win." And there wasn't like a real conviction in it. And it came around to him, and he was like, "I would kill to win." And he meant it. He got in touch with this absolutely primal competitiveness within him, within himself. It's really something. We have a lot of layers of shame and judgment and disowning that come in around these energies. And it does produce dysfunction. It produces, well, maybe we can talk about ways in which it might manifest. So how to feel our way into what these disowned voices are. Well, Zazen, really helps just to open the space for investigating these qualities within ourselves, to see what aspects might be disowned. Putting ourselves into new and uncomfortable situations actually is a good way to find those qualities, because certain emotions get elicited within us, which we can't deny, and then we can investigate. Well, where's that been? Also, and this is work that I've doing consciously, is vow work. To actually make your vows and to be conscious about the vows you want to uphold, what you want to support in the world, what you would like to cultivate within yourself. Our bodhisattva vows are great examples. The precepts are great examples. Okay? So we express a vow to maintain something, and then we find, well, what's getting in the way of me actually honoring that vow? That's a process which can bring to your unconsciousness what's getting in the way there. Because these vows are kind of like commitments, but a disowned self is kind of like an unconscious commitment. It's like a commitment not to be a certain way. But if you've got a commitment to be, say, not lie, and then you really look at yourself, and you see where you are not being truthful. You're going to include, the greater part of yourself, because we break the vows all the time. That's one reason why the vows are so, our Buddhist vows are so big, so infinite. is that we have to fail. We always fail. And then we are called to accept ourselves in that failing. You know, I'm coming to see that if we don't have expressed vows in these areas of our lives, in our work, in our relationships, and in ourself, and in our spiritual development, you know, it's very easy to bypass whole areas of our life. Right? Spiritual bypassing is when we throw everything into the spiritual development, and then relationship, and even work, actualization, you know, gets subordinated to that great enlightenment path. Right? That's spiritual bypassing. But it can work the other way too. You know, we subordinate some people, and nobody here is doing this. You're all here practicing in the Zen Center. But we, you know, say, oh yeah, spiritual development is important, but that's not for me. You know, I'll just trickle along, and I'm gonna, you know, be a great family person, family, husband, wife. You know, I'm gonna go all in on my relational development. Or I'm going to actualize myself in my work. You know, I'm not going to pay attention to my spiritual development or my self-development. There's all sorts of bypasses. All sorts of bypasses. So these are, you know, selves that want to be born and developed within ourselves, qualities, you know, that we want to integrate within ourselves. But it does take time to do this reintegration. The story of Senjo, it's like, if only we could just meet our disowned self and embrace her and become one with her like this. If only it were that easy. And I shouldn't say it's easy, because even in the myth, 5 years apart, the suffering around that, yeah. So, but, you know, it takes recognizing what those disowned aspects are, the disowned self is, and then bringing love to that, and attention, and then nurturing that reintegration of that quality within yourself. And that's very much of an embodied process. Continue to feel what it feels like to be that. Whatever the disowned quality is, or the disowned self. It's not just up here. It can never be just up, you know, up in the mind. It has to be embodied. So those are some thoughts on disowned selves. This is a really beautiful koan, and it's very unique in our whole tradition. Out of the whole 700 odd koans that we have in our curriculum, this is the one that has, you know, the strongest quality of kind of an emotional, the importance of a, you know, emotional wholeness, not disowning, you know, deep emotional attachments actually with our loved ones. So, well, hopefully this has been of interest and maybe stimulating. So we'll sit for a bit and then we can discuss.